So we are here today to talk about 3 ways to go from invisible to credible at work. And so let me get into it. First of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Kisha Wynter, and as you could see from the deck, I am an executive coach and leadership consultant. And what I do is I specialize in helping women really recognize and own and leverage what makes them distinctive so that they can soar and thrive at work. But as you know, how we show up in one area of our life is how we show up in many different areas. So it's not just about work, but it is also about really every area of our lives. I'm a former HR leader working in Fortune 500 companies for about 20 years. I like to tell people I started working when I was 5, because, I'm only 25 still. But in all seriousness, I really enjoyed what I did in corporate, but I really wanted to leave and make an impact in the lives of women externally while being outside of an organization, because sometimes we can be really limited when we work for an organization. So I've been doing this since the pandemic full time, and it has been an exciting transition for me. Fun fact. Okay, so I have 2 fun facts because I'm a little extra. I don't just do one thing. So one fun fact is that I do love the beach. I say I love white sandy beaches and I have to say that I'm a bit of a beach snob. So even though I live in Stamford, Connecticut, if you hear a little accent, I'm originally from Jamaica, and I will not go in the water if I can't see through it. So, but in all seriousness, the beach really got me through the pandemic, and I'm really lucky to be able to just walk close to the beach to my house. So I still love that. And my second thing that you should know about me is I love languages. As a native English speaker and Anglo, it's really hard for us to learn foreign languages, but I'm really proud of myself for having learned enough Spanish to be peligroso, as they say in Spanish, enough Portuguese to sobreviver in a vacation in Brazil. And now my eyes are set on French for all you French Canadians out there. But the pronunciation in French is très difficile. So I know I probably chopped that up a bit. So feel free to correct me in the chat, because as we said, I love myself. So you loving me is just icing on the cake. Where I am located, I should say, I'm in Stamford, Connecticut, which is the land of the Siwanoy and Shattuck peoples. As I said, we're here to talk about how to go from invisible to credible at work. And what this is about communication, because at the end of the day, if you don't know this, communication is really the distance between you and everything that you've ever wanted in your life. I'll go far to say in work, it could be the difference between you getting the recognition, the pay, the promotion, the leadership opportunities that you deserve. It could also make a difference in terms of the quality of your relationships, because how many of you know that if you're not able to communicate effectively in your relationships are truly going to struggle. And as I said before, how we show up in the professional area of our life is how we show up also in the personal area. So what you learned today hopefully will help you not just at work, but also in your personal life as well. And we learn to harness our voice with skill, strategy, and intention. We really can make an impact in our own lives and in the lives of others. And so I'm going to start today by telling you the story of 2 different women. It's called The Tale of 2 Women, myself and one of my clients. And you'll see both of us are from completely different backgrounds, but it's interesting how we struggled in the same area, at least for me, in the start of my career. And we got some similar feedback that I'll share with you. So my personal story. So imagine this, Act 1, me, little girl, me, Kisha. I am in the beautiful island, Jamaica, as I said before, and I'm looking through the window in awe of my bedroom window. And I'm looking and I'm seeing how the sun is setting over the clear Caribbean sky as there's a golden hue formed over the sky. And I feel the humidity dissipating from the little corner of my tropical island that I'm in. And I smell the aroma of my mother's cooking, Jamaican curry chicken. That's the dinner that I just ate. And then I hear my uncles and aunts, I could hear them laughing and talking in the living room. And I hear dominoes shuddering on the desk, on the table, the living room table. And I'm so excited. So I skip and run because the energy is exciting and I'm pulled in. And I definitely want to participate in this vibrant environment. I hear my dad saying, six love, which I'm no expert at domino, but apparently that means you're pretty close to winning. Your winning is going to be imminent. I hear my mom yell out and say, that's not fair. You guys are cheating. You should stop cheating. So I insert myself as I am, boisterous little girl, and I say, Dad, you should not cheat. And joy is coming out, and I'm excited, but immediately across the table, my aunt says, little girl in her Jamaican accent, go on to your room and go play with your sister. Don't interrupt adults when you see them talking. Children are to be seen and not heard. My aunt goes to my mom and my dad and says, you guys spoil these kids way too much. And my mom looks at me with a very strict eye. And I knew what she meant, that if you don't go to your room right now, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I go to my room, absolutely despondent and deflated, because it was in that moment that my brilliance, I felt, was dim. My light was dim. But it was especially in that moment that I first learned how to quiet and silence my own voice. It was in that moment where I first learned to become invisible. You see, a lot of times, and I look back at this story not because I think the adults in my life ever meant any harm. I know they really didn't. They were just communicating what they learned through their culture. Regardless of that, it really instilled within me a really complicated relationship with the concept of owning my voice. I felt like Jekyll and Hyde because at one moment I'm boisterous and outspoken and loud because frankly, that's how the women in my family are. Despite the fact that they were telling me to be the nice, quiet little girl, they were actually quite direct and quite outspoken and opinionated themselves. And they weren't quieting themselves. So I saw them modeling one thing and then telling me something different. And so I went into corporate America with these mixed messages on showing up. So what about you? Do you ever feel like you are, when it comes to showing up in your power, owning your power, whether or not it's how you speak and how you express yourself, you feel like you've encountered mixed messages yourself? And so I see that it's a common experience. And so I entered into corporate America with this mindset of, really testing my environment. And I remember one executive, it was the CEO of the organization, that I happened to be in a meeting with him, being still rather young in my career. And he pulled me aside in his office after a couple of days after the meeting. And he says, Kisha, you have a lot of really good perspective to share. Don't wait to be able to share your voice. Learn to insert yourself. Well, of course, the little girl in me squealed with excitement because I'm like, you don't have to tell me twice to speak up. He gave me the permission, and I will tell you, I had never gotten that feedback again in that particular organization. But Act two, of course, the story doesn't always end up consistently good. I start working for a few years later for another leader. And I remember sitting in a meeting with him and saying, your ideas for what we're supposed to do around this project, he was sharing his perspective on what to do. I think there are a lot of problems with it. And I explained why. And I was very direct with how I communicated. And he said to me, I think you need to stop drinking that green drink that you're drinking right now, referring to the green smoothie that I was drinking. It's kale and spinach. I still drink it today because it's turning you into the angry, incredible Hulk. And for me, in one quick second, it turned from direct conversation to him putting me in the box of an angry Black female. And at time, I went back in my shell. And again, I silenced myself because I was receiving, again, mixed messages about how I need to show up and communicate at work. In corporate America, you're told to speak up and be opinionated, but don't be too opinionated because guess what? at the end of the day, there may be backlash. Naomi's story is a little different. She is also an immigrant to the U.S. She is from Japan. She came when she was like maybe a year or two old. So in all intents and purposes, at home, she was Japanese, at street, at school, she was American. According to her, she said her culture back at home was that she was trained that she was supposed to defer to authority, much in alignment with Japanese culture, be quiet, be respectful of the elders and adults as well, similar to my culture. But also in her culture, the voice of women wasn't necessarily cultivated. And so as a little girl, she would play. She would play around with the kids in her neighborhood, and a lot of them were Japanese and of some other Asian descent. And at one point, again, some boys were playing and they were cheating. And so she would take over the situation. It says, because her value as a kid was violated. Like, if you're not going to play fair, then I'm going to take over this mess. And she did. And the parents complained to her parents, who then told her that you need to be nice, Naomi. And she says, well, why should I be nice? They're the ones who weren't doing the right thing. I was basically holding them accountable. I'm sure she wasn't using the word accountable at age of 7. I'm improvising here. But I'm the one that was holding them accountable. And her parents says, it doesn't matter. You don't want to ruffle the feathers. You don't want to cause problems. Just learn to be nice. And it seemed like such a simple thing to say. But what she said to me was, at that point, where her light began to dim as well. And she learned to silence herself and to become invisible. But in either case, 2 women from 2 different backgrounds getting the same feedback. Lo and behold, her manager, she went into corporate America, and she also had a complicated relationship. Actually, she said it wasn't very complicated. She just wasn't going to argue with anybody and say anything because it always backfired for her, she felt like. But she was a strong performer. And the organization brought me in to be her coach, to help her to own her voice, to have leadership or executive presence. Oh my gosh, how many of you have ever gotten this feedback? Need to have more leadership presence, executive presence. I mean, that phrase alone is so filled with a lot of unconscious biases. That's a whole other talk. So she was told this. So I came in, they said she lacked confidence. And I had a conversation with her. She said, actually, I don't lack confidence. That's not it. I feel like if I speak up and own my voice, I'm going to get backlash. So why should I really bother? And so I said, listen, I gave the same advice that the CEO gave to me. And I said, well, you know what? If you wait to be invited to say something, you're going to be waiting forever. So just learn to insert yourself and don't worry about what people have to say. And she did. And the feedback that she got was amazing. She showed up in conversation, and she was able to share her perspective on her work, and they absolutely loved it. But then she got a little bit too brazen, as they would say, in their opinion, not in my opinion, because she says, you know what, while I'm at it, I think I'm underpaid. So I'm going to go ahead and negotiate a salary increase with my manager. Unfortunately, there was backlash in that conversation because they were so used to her being quiet and reserved and not self-advocating. She said she felt the reaction was like, well, you should be grateful that we're doing all these things for you. Why would you be asking for a salary increase? And so her and I worked on it. I said, well, I don't think you should give up. So I coached her on how to go back and have the conversation multiple times. The good news is that ultimately she did get the increase, because at the end of the day, she was a very high performer and she did deserve it. And they were scared of losing her. But, it didn't take away the fact that she was dissuaded and experienced backlash when she even attempted to advocate and speak up for herself. And I see something in the chat that says, and I'm going to read it for a second, because I think some people's ego are so fragile that any conflict that you completely not agreeing with them is seen as a threat. And I totally agree with that. And I also want to talk about, just real quick, as I'm thinking in the moment, sometimes people think that when you are grateful, you shouldn't self-advocate and ask for what you deserve. But I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. You can be completely grateful for the opportunity that has been given to you, and you can still know what your worth is and demand that worth. There's a challenge. It's mind-blowing to me how common this experience is. You all said yes in the chat. two different women from two different backgrounds experiencing very, very similar things. Be confident, but not too confident. Be powerful, but not too powerful. Definitely don't be audacious to ask for a salary increase. But just like a lot of times, our experiences actually is backed up by data. And so there was a study that was conducted by an organization called Crucial Learning. Crucial Learning is a leadership consulting organization that, according to the study that they did, it revealed that when women were equally as forceful and direct as their male counterparts, their perceived competency dropped by 35%. And also their perceived worth dropped by $15,000. Boom. And so you may be asking yourself, oh my God, like what's going to happen? Are you like these women? Have you experienced backlash because of how you communicate? Constant, yes, yes, keep it coming all the time. All right, even retaliation. Wow, I'm sorry you had to experience that. So absolutely. So we know that this is not made up. This is something that a lot of women go through all the time. And so, okay, Kisha, like, what do we do with this? So before we go into like how these things show up, I want to really highlight to you, a lot of times people say, learn to be more confident. And look, I'm a confidence coach. I talk about your power unleashed and owning your power and all of that. But a lot of times it's actually misdiagnosed. It's not a lack of confidence that causes us to diminish and use soft language and not speak up boldly and courageously. A lot of times it's actually, we don't even realize that it's an unconscious competence that we've developed on learning how to navigate an organization, a structure, a system that was not designed for us to win in. And Daryl says, you're aggressive when you're just being assertive. Absolutely. And so these structures were not designed for us to win in. And so we have to learn to be palatable and acceptable to those in power. And this is why we use the diminishing language that I'm going to talk about that next. And so we've strategically figured out, even if you don't realize it, how to survive in a culture that we will experience backlash if we go too far. What are these coping mechanisms? Well, the first one is diminishing language. So these are the three: rambling and fast speech. Now, here's the thing. We engage in these languages to cope. They allow us to survive, but they don't allow us to thrive, and they cause us to remain invisible and not credible at work. All right. So I want to talk about what they are first before we talk about how we fix them. So the first one, diminishing language. What does this look like? Diminishing language looks like using language that downplays your ideas. So you say things like, I think, I believe, if it's not too much to ask, I don't want to bother you. And you know what the result is? Your ideas end up seeming small. If you've ever been guilty, I see commenting already, of saying any of these phrases, then I have to actively work on some of them myself. So here's an example. So I was just thinking maybe that you guys might believe that your ideas aren't very good. Can you imagine if I showed up talking like this? And so you kind of don't want to give your opinion. And so if it's not too much trouble, maybe you ladies perhaps want to type in the chat, but I really don't want to bother you too much. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, share in the chat, how credible would you think I am if I showed up talking like this? So who said, Holly says -2, Shia says 0, CC1, 002. Not very, -1. Absolutely. And look, I have a YouTube channel, and when I just started, my very first YouTube video was horrendous because I just wasn't good at it. If you ever record yourself and listen to yourself talking sometimes, you would be amazed and maybe shocked how many of these language patterns we include. All right, so the next one is going to be rambling. Rambling looks like over-explaining. Sometimes when we're nervous, we tend to over-explain things. We provide too much context, excessive context and content as well, because sometimes it's coming from a place of wanting to prove yourself. and show that you know your stuff, right? That's an unconscious way a lot of times of dealing with microaggressions, because you're trying to prove yourself that you belong and you are worth it. But the result is lack of clarity, that your message is diluted and you become less influential. So what does this look like? Imagine an HR officer saying, as the HR officer, it is very obvious that people are not so happy when they took the survey. We know they are leaving the company. The employee survey is one of the things that managers are not doing a good job of. If we could pay them more and they would increase morale, because this toxic workplaces, some of the feedback we got, they feel stressed, we can't recruit people, our external reputation is at risk, and we keep having to train new people. Plus, there is this discussion for Gen Z and millennials wanting work-life balance, but we don't have high performance, and the loss of productivity is costing us. OMG. What was my main point? Does anybody get my main point? Let me know. Shin says no. It says, I have no idea what you were talking about. I literally have no idea what I was talking about. Okay, somebody says the company. Bottom line, yes, the company sucks. A lot of times when we show up talking, it's like diarrhea of the mouth, and we don't have a clear message that we want to put across. And then the third piece that we'll talk about is fast-paced speech. That looks like racing through your points, losing your breath, being hard to follow, having less clarity, right? Because when you're talking too fast, people really can't understand you and you're really incomprehensible. So what does this look like? Okay, so let's go. Owning your power teaches us that we don't throw up our hands and surrender just because we don't have a title, but instead we seek ways in which we can affect change within ourselves and in the environments in which we work. There were many times in organizations I worked that I didn't have the most senior title in the room, but because I had either expert power or referent power, I became more influential. I could affect change with a subset of the organization. As a segment of the organization that trusted me grew, influence and power expanded. Were you able to keep up with me? Shin said, absolutely. Okay, you win an award. Nope, only by reading along. Okay. Some people said, I wish not. So most people, I wish not a chance. Those of you, like, imagine if I didn't have the words on the screen, you probably would even less be able to keep up. As I said before, both Naomi and I share, like in our experience, I shared some of the root causes of why we didn't communicate, but I want you to be thinking about, for yourself, how does this apply to you? Take a step back as I go through the next couple of slides and think about what causes you to shrink when you do and not show up in your power from a communication standpoint. Here are some of the root causes. If you heard our story, a lot of it is social conditioning. Women are socialized to prioritize being nice over asserting themselves. And if we think of pop culture, one of the recent stories I remember of a female artist, her name is Megan Thee Stallion. She's a rapper. And she was basically shot in the foot and had to go to the hospital. And she didn't press charges against the perpetrator because she knew there would be backlash. She knew she would have been criticized. And so luckily for her, the state of California doesn't wait for people who are attacked to actually press charges. The city of Los Angeles press charges for her. And it looks like her assessment was right, because even though she didn't press charges, she was attacked viciously by media, the bloggers, the influencers, the media folks. And when you look, like, you can think, she's just one example. There are women of many different backgrounds that this has happened to. But the message that this sends us is that if people like her with the money, the resources that she has, and she has fame, people don't believe her, or there's a backlash for speaking up for yourself, for protecting your own life, what does that tell the rest of us that don't have the finances that she does, or the fame, or the celebrity? It's not just when we're growing up, it's even in society, social conditioning, what we see on the media, that does not really create an environment for women to express themselves and to advocate for themselves. And then when we think about at work, we talked about it before, there's negative perception. That's what the study says. We feel like we don't have a choice, right? You're looked at as bossy, right? As Naomi was called, angry, as basically I was called, or bitchy and aggressive. And the penalties end up, you saw, $15,000 less in your worth, right? you're less liked, you're less respected, and frankly, there can be a financial impact to your compensation as well. So these are very steep root causes at the end of the day. Here's the thing. Again, I said it before and I'm going to reiterate it. You're going to hear over and over again that you should really work on building your confidence. And I'm going to say it's not because of lack of confidence or a sign of weakness that we utilize these coping mechanism and fade into the background. It's because we have figured out how to survive and work, really figured out how to navigate a work environment that was not designed for us to win. The question I have is, at the end of the day, in light of all this, right, should we continue to self-silence, shrink, and conform? What do you guys say? No. My Shia says no. I see at least one no in the chat. Awesome. All right. I see no way, no way. All the notes coming in. I was waiting on the notes because I wasn't going to go further without the notes, my friend. So yes, the answer is no. And why? Because as I said before, there are implications, there are negative implications when we don't learn to speak up and communicate with power and impact. Even though there's backlash in one way, we actually don't get the recognition that we deserve. People end up speaking over you. They take credit for your work. You don't get visibility. And it limits your ability to get promoted and rewarded for the results that you're even bringing to the organization. And so instead of trying to survive, sometimes the things that we need to do is to challenge the workplace and the culture in which that we're working in, so that we can encourage the organization and force the organization to create a culture that women can thrive in. And so what do I say based on this quote by Joan C. Williams? Sometimes what women need to do to survive and thrive in the world is exactly the opposite of what they need to do to change it, of what we need to do to change it. How do you take your power back? All right. This is what we're going to be working on now. How do we take our power back? Right. We talked about the fact that diminishing language is definitely not effective. And so instead of using diminishing language, I'm going to say flex your communication style. And I want to address this upfront, that most times when you hear people say, oh, like a woman should not use diminishing language, she needs to learn to be more assertive and confident in the way in which she communicates. There is some truth to that. But as you see from flexing your communications, that assertiveness is not the only thing. It's not the only way to influence. As a matter of fact, there's an article by Harvard Business Review called What's Your Influencing Style? And it talks about 5 different ways. Here are the 5 different ways that you can adapt to influence a room. And imagine, you guys are all left-brained people, right? So imagine 100% of the population are equally influenced so you have 20% of the population is influenced by assertiveness, 20% on inspiring, 20% on negotiation, and the rest. If you only use one style, let's just say you are the rationalizing person. Rationalizing person is someone that puts your arguments in front of you with a lot of data to back up. And if you're working with engineers and, people in that kind of field, or people in the finance, you might be able to influence them with data. But here's a challenge. And I used to be HR leader for an organization of a lot of finance leaders and also people with some engineering background. And here's the thing. A lot of times I actually see that they have the data and they hide behind the data. They actually don't share their perspective and what they think. They just share the information. And if you do that, you're actually not going to be able to influence very effectively. And so what I say to people, sometimes you do need to give the data, but sometimes you need to present the data with a level of assertion. Sometimes you need to just be more inspiring in how you communicate. And by being inspiring, it can get people to take the action that you want to take, or they feel more connected and bought into you as a person. So they're going to do whatever you say. And so that's the takeaway here. You want to flex your style. However, let's address the assertiveness piece, because diminishing language is a lack of assertiveness. So if you want to correct the language that we talked about before, is instead of saying I think or I believe, you can preface your statements by saying my recommendation is. Instead of saying maybe, you might be able to say, here's another option. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, I do this all the time. Does that make sense? This is the one that I work on the most. I don't say I think or believe it maybe anymore, but I have to catch myself from saying, does that make sense? It's let me know if you have any questions. Type which one of them you think, I would love to see in the chat, which one of them you think you need to work on, since I was so honest that I'm still working on that. Does that make sense? And so the next one you want to correct is rambling. But instead of rambling, you want to correct that to be speaking in bullet points. So how do you do that? What does that mean? First of all, you identify 2 to 4 key points. I like to say 3 because 3 is just so easy to follow. People are able to remember 3 points really well. And you want to not just give people all this information. You want to provide only the necessary context, because people are only going to remember so much, especially living in a world where there's so much data coming at us. Only provide the necessary context. And if you're presenting something at work, you have the information as a backup, all the extra research and information as a backup. And if the person that you're talking to wants more detail, you can provide it for them. So definitely you want to be prepared for them digging deeper, but don't overwhelm people with too much information. And one way to do this is the third point. It's use headlines. I was coaching a C-suite leader in one organization, and I met with the board member of this woman. And the board member said, you need to coach her to speak in headlines and not in paragraphs. And I love that quote. And headlines, essentially, if you think of a billboard, what it does, it uses attention-grabbing language that captures you, but it's not, lost in all the sauce or lost in all the details. And the third thing for me is you want to tailor your message to the audience. So if you think of, this is, again, one of the feedback that I get from people a lot, from people who work at mid-level and junior levels in organization, because managers and individual contributors are really buried in data, and it's really hard for them to lift their head above the data and talk about themes and trends and the main message. And so if you're presenting to like an executive level or C-suite leader, you're going to want to take out the most important thing and ask yourself, what's in it for them? What do they really care about, right? If it's a finance people, yeah, they're going to care about the numbers. If the strategy people, is how does this actually relate to the organization goal and strategy? So always ask yourself, not what do I care about my presentation, not what do I want to present, but what does your audience care about? So remember that HR leader that was like, we didn't know what he was talking about or she was talking about? Here we go. What if he had started off it like this? This would have been a better way. As you know, we recently conducted the annual employee satisfaction survey. We have 3 main takeaways after reviewing the data. 1, employees are dissatisfied and there's a lot of turnover. 2, there is a big impact of having a toxic workplace culture, and it's in quotations because that's the word our employee population is calling the culture. And 3, there's a desire for greater work-life balance. And then I would go on, if needed, and I would give some additional points on each bullet. Now let's take overall employee satisfaction and turnover as an example. And then I would give all the details that would back up the evidence or the data that supported that main point. Isn't that much clearer and much better to follow versus what we were talking about? Type yes in the chat if you think, yep, sweet and to the point, Rosie. Absolutely. All right. And then the last one is around using fast-paced speech. We correct that by literally just slowing down. So the first thing that we want to talk about here is it looks like deliberate pacing. And deliberate pacing is really, again, you're pacing your words, you're slowing down so that people can keep up with your words. One, it just allows you to be calmer. Because a lot of times we are rushing through things because we're nervous and anxious, and deliberate pacing allows you to emphasize certain points. And it also requires you to have a level of courage because there's going to be silence in between. Talking about silence, pregnant pauses is extended amount of silence. It's extended amount of silence. And that definitely projects an air of confidence because it shows that you are comfortable with silence. A lot of people are not comfortable with silence. And so when you use pregnant pauses, it comes across, it allows you to be to give the statements that you make air to land and breathe in your listener. And it allows your listener to fully keep up and digest and internalize what it is you're saying. I love this one because in doing this, it allows you to be a master communicator as it projects authority. It projects a sense of confidence and being in control. The third one, and I'll do that now, is breathing. Just breathe. Sometimes if you're talking so quickly, like when I was rushing through the fast-paced speech slide, which is a tongue twister, I myself was feeling out of breath. And sometimes, first of all, when you breathe, it causes your body to go into rest and digest mode. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system and it helps you to calm down. So by calming down, everything slows down instead of it being so accelerated. And then verbal highlights is another one that I emphasize a lot. I love it because it is another great tool that helps you to highlight different parts of what you're saying. That brings clarity. It increases engagement. So, for example, if you want to command somebody's attention, you speak louder, and that commands attention. Now, if you're yelling for your own speech, then you're just going to annoy people. So you don't want to be yelling your whole speech. And there are times when you lower your voices. So instead of commanding attention, you actually draw people in because you're like, oh, what are they saying? And they listen a little bit harder. So that's another good strategy. You can speed up your words at time, not all the time, but it allows you to insert a little bit of energy in what you're saying. But then again, you slow it down. You have to balance it with slowing it down as well to really emphasize some important points you want to make. So verbal highlights is great because it creates this cadence and a rhythm, which is like a sort of verbal dance between you and your audience, and it just keeps everyone engaged. And then finally, there's enunciating and articulating. So it is literally taking the time to pronounce your words so that people can keep up with you. And if you speak like English as a second language, etc., it's not about changing your accent or anything like that. I'm all about, being authentic with who you are. But I find that it helps people to understand you a little bit clearer when you just pronounce and enunciate and articulate your words. And also, if you're a native English speaker and you're speaking, it's funny because I just thought about this right now. When I first started my YouTube channel, people would like comment on my channel and like email me in my website. They're like, we like to listen to your YouTube channel because you pronounce your words and we can keep up. And I had a lot of people from, because I had employees when I used to work in corporate in Brazil. So they would like message me and say, we can keep up with your English. It's so great. Slowing it down would look like me saying, owning your power teaches us that we don't have to throw up our hands in surrender just because we don't have a title, but instead seek other ways in which we can affect change within ourselves and in the environments in which we work. There were many times in the organizations I worked in that I didn't have the most senior title in the room, but because I had either expert power or referent power, I became more influential and could affect change within a subset of that organization. Now, as the segment of the organization that trusted me grew, my influence and my power expanded. So what was that like compared to when I was rushing through it before? What was the impact of me reading it at this pace? Much better. Awesome. Applause. Truly confident, calm, clear. Okay. I love that you said the clarity was there. I'm glad that you got that. Great. So remember this fun little study about how women's perceived competency dropped when they are equally as assertive and forceful as their male colleagues. And so dropped by 35%, and their dollar amount in terms of their value dropped by 15,000. So you may be saying to yourself, okay, Kisha, we want to speak up confidently, but if we're going to be getting backlash, how do we deal with this? I'm so glad you asked, because the second part of that study was an experiment where they did a bunch of interviews where it basically said that if you use 4-second framing statement before you stated you gave the information that you wanted to give in an assertive way or in a direct way. Using these 4-second framing statements could reduce the backlash by up to 27%. So I would say these are savvy mechanisms that you put in place so you don't have to shrink back from owning your voice, but you're using a savvy mechanism to prepare your audience for what is coming up. So I'll share 2 of them with you now. The first one is the behavior frame. And it says, I'm going to express my opinion very directly. I'll be as specific as possible. And that reduced backlash by 10% because the person expressed their intent before the content of what they were saying. And what I didn't say before is that why this works is because a lot of times when you are very direct and adamant in how you speak, the backlash happens because people think you have lost control. And unfortunately, they end up thinking that women have lost control of the situation, meaning they lost their temper or they quote unquote are very emotional. But if you use these behavior frames, and you know they like to dismiss us by saying we're emotional when we're actually speaking rather than listening to what we're saying. So when you do use these frames, it signals to the listener that I'm actually being very intentional right here. I haven't lost control. My temper is not gone. I'm intentional about what I'm doing. And the second behavior frame, I love this one because it's called the value frame. It ties it back, the behavior that you're saying or the directness, it ties it back to a value. So here it says, I see it as a matter of honesty and integrity. So it is important for me to be very clear about where I stand. And so it shows you here that the value that they're harping on is honesty and integrity. And a big win-win could be you tying it back to the organizational values. You're going to guarantee that you're going to be getting buy-in if you tie back what you're saying to an organizational value. And that value frame reduced backlash by about 16%. So summing up, here are 3 ways that you go from invisible to credible. 1, you flex your communication style instead of using diminishing language. You speak in bullet points instead of rambling. You slow down your speech instead of using fast-paced speech. And look, at the end of the day, what I know is this, right? Now is the time for us at the beginning of New Year to set the intentions. We just talked about setting the intentions to reclaim your power and your credibility at work, because ultimately it's one thing when other people discredit you, but it's a whole other thing where you unintentionally relinquish that power because of an ineffective communication style. Because frankly, it totally negates and betrays the unbelievably hard work that you've put in to get this far in your career. So even though this workshop is coming to an end, and I've absolutely had a blast with all of you because you've been super engaged, you know what doesn't come to an end? It's you stepping up and learning to own your voice. What doesn't end is you investing in yourself for your growth. And what doesn't end is your commitment to recognizing and valuing yourself in a way that you're going to self-advocate. I want you guys to take some actions as you go away. So let's get into what are the next steps. I would love for you today, right? So if we just come to a workshop and we just gather information. One of the things I like to say is that we don't want to be information junkies. We want to be implementation masters. And so decide to make one commitment of one action that you're going to take now. Don't try to do everything, but type in the chat. What's one thing that you can take away from the talk today that you can implement that will help you to level up your communication at work? And think about it and type it in the chat so other people can get ideas. I see Shin saying definitely speak slower. Holly says pause more, breathe. Absolutely. The second thing that you can do is connect with me on LinkedIn and message me and let me know what you've applied, what worked, what didn't work. I always respond to my LinkedIn DMs. I'm really good about that, probably much quicker than I do my own text messages. And the third action, see, Holly thinks that's funny. The third action is to book a call with me. And so for some of you, this is gonna be enough, right? You're gonna take the information, you're gonna implement it, you're gonna run. But some of you want specialized help. You're gonna want to learn to implement quicker and faster so that you can get faster results. And you may have specific work situations that you want some coaching on. You can click on the link and you can book time to chat. And then the final thing I will say is that I have a new book that is coming out. So I did say that, I think I mentioned it, I might not have, that I do have a free download on how to convert diminishing to powerful language. I give you 3 bullets there, but there's like a lot longer list. So if you click on the link, you could sign up for my newsletter, and then you would be able to get the announcement for my exciting news on my new book that is coming out, Your Power Unleashed: How Savvy Women Use Courage to Get Promoted, Paid, and Find Fulfillment. And my whole reason for writing this book is really to help women break up with self-doubt and fear so that they can break through what's held them back from getting advanced at work, so that they can get promoted, pay, and find fulfillment, just like it says here. And if you think there's anybody else that could benefit from reading a book like this that will be coming out in the spring, feel free to share that link with them as well, because anyone who gets that free download will be in my newsletter, and you will be notified of when the book comes out. So it's been a blast talking to you all tonight, and I look forward to continuing to be in this community with WIMDI. Thank you so much, Holly, for inviting me.